Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ben Crossman, and everyone out there, thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening to us on IRN, thank you so much. If you're listening to us on the podcast, great. If you are listening to us on the live video feed, perfect. And hey, anywhere else, thank you. So on today's program, we have computer and technology news. Last checking, I think we had about 20 different topics to cover, and trust me, we're not going to get to all of them, but even if we don't, hey, it's still going to be a really fun show. And of course, speaking of the topics, if you'd like to check out anything that we cover here on today's program, check out the show notes, computeramerica.com. It will have links to any articles, products, reviews, topics, videos, anything like that. Everything will be made available for you at computeramerica.com. Now, with that being said, I guess I should be announcing this almost every single day. But of course, CES 2020 will be coming up starting January 7th, I believe. It's the 7th through the 9th. And so in early January, we will be attending that. No, we will not be broadcasting live from the show floor, but we will be recording some different kinds of content that we should be uploading to places like the YouTube and the podcast and what have you. And then, of course, when we come back, we will have a ton of guests. Hopefully, while we're out there, that's the largest trade show when it comes to technology. And hey, we're going to shake a lot of hands. We're going to use a lot of disinfectant, and then we're going to have a lot of these companies on the show. So it should be a good time. And so there's a holiday break starting, I think December 21st is our first day off, which is like a Saturday. And then we'll be back probably for like a show or two in January 2nd and 3rd. And then we'll be back the week after that, which should be, I think, like January. I can look at the calendar instead of pulling these off the top of my head like a genius. We should be back to a completely normal schedule, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, January 13th. So expect some fuzziness in there, but otherwise it's just going to be Computer America. And hey, we should have a lot of great things for you to hear about. And hey, it's going to be fun. Now, of course, as I said before, computer and technology news that will dominate today's show. So why don't we go ahead and get things started? So here we go. So I think for our first one, we're going to do something fun where we are going to cover Xbox. Yes, Xbox is, a personal favorite of mine. Never got into PlayStation. I know that PlayStation, by many people's standards, is the superior console. But let's face it, I had an Xbox One, and then following that, an Xbox 360, which was just so dominant in the mid to late 2000s that I have a soft spot for it. So now I love covering the latest news on the latest Xbox, and here's what we have. I'm trying to find the two different stories. Let's see, here we go. I found the other one. Okay, but the first story we're going to cover, this one from Ars Technica, saying that the next gen Xbox is in the wild connecting to current gen players. So check that out. That's pretty interesting because obviously when it comes to networking, it really doesn't matter what kind of hardware you're looking at. But hey, it means that people are out there. Maybe you feel like they might have a competitive edge. Maybe they're on Project Scarlett. You never know. So they said that specs have not been finalized, but Spencer confirms that the back-compatible pledge. So a late Wednesday post from the leader of Microsoft's Xbox team, Phil Spencer, confirmed that the first Project Scarlett, and that's Scarlett console, is officially in the wild ahead of its late 2020 launch window. And of course, it should be available next holiday season as well as the PS5. Both of them, I think, have been confirmed for late 2020. So there you go. Now, they said, and it started, Spencer posted on Twitter on Wednesday saying that this week, I brought my Project Scarlett console home and it became my primary console, playing my games, connecting to the community, and yes, using my Elite 2 controller. So, without any extra post clarifications as of press time, we can only confirm, or we can only surmise so much from this single statement, but it's admittedly dense. Spencer confirms the few details that he and the Xbox team have previously announced, that Project Scarlett, the current codename for the unnamed Xbox, the next generation Xbox, which probably won't be called Xbox 2. Currently we're on the Xbox One, the Xbox One X, the Xbox One S, so on and so forth. Probably not Xbox 2, hopefully not Xbox 360, but yeah, we're still looking for what it's actually going to be called. We just don't know. And they said, for one, that Spencer is playing games that connect to the community is with existing fare, which confirms Xbox's pledge that all existing Xbox One software will be able to be played on Scarlett, which is great. You want that backwards compatibility. Gone are the days, I think, where companies thought that they could get away with people spending hundreds or thousands of dollars on a game library for a particular console, and players would just be like, okay, whatever, and then not be able to play those games in the future. Many of them are, on CDs, which are, well, maybe with our next story, not so resilient to fading out, but many of them are also digital. You download them on your hard drive and you're good to go. So there's really it's not like we have cartridges and, you have to be like, oh, well, this console doesn't take these cartridges. No, it's all digital. And even more so in the cloud. So Xbox and Microsoft have both said that they're looking at getting more games to stream to these consoles. So that's something that Google's working on, that Microsoft's working on, that PlayStation's working on. They're all planning on doing it. So there's no reason not to have backwards compatibility. Let's see. So they also mentioned Microsoft also pledged that the existing accessories for the Xbox One will work for the Scarlett. So if you go ahead and shell out $200 for the Elite Series 2 controller, which I did not even, know about. But yeah, I guess now we're up to the $200 Elite 2 controller, and it will work with the next gen console, which is good because obviously you don't want to be spending that kind of money and then not have it last a long time. They also mentioned that the kit's connectivity to the standard retail Xbox One environment, as opposed to a sandbox dev kit, is a sharp turn from their practice. Previous Xbox generations have been exclusively connected to private systems, including the Xbox 360's partner net. There you go. They mentioned that Scarlett specs are closer to the finalized than we suspected. Of course, I think at this point, there's, because so much is digital, so much is just done in the cloud, that your point of access really doesn't matter all that much. It's more to the more just getting all the software and user interface working nicely. So there you go. And of course, with that clarification from Spencer, there's no telling what he's honestly using, whether he's using an unfinished developer kit or if he actually has a true system in his hands. So, as the article mentions, we've already heard that Scarlett will emphasize high-performance gaming, whether in higher resolution, which would be like the PlayStation has already promised, up to 8K, so we can only assume Project Scarlett will do 8K as well. Higher frame rates, up to 120 frames per second. Personally, I think that's low. is low for computers. I think a lot of computer games are expecting 144 frames, but for a console, if they can actually get that, I mean, so many of our current games, we're still looking for 60. So many of them run either 30 or somewhere between 30 and 60 and not able to be pinned to that 120. So part of that power equation comes from the emphasis on solid-state drive, which is great, as opposed to spinning plate drives, and along with a jump, a new generation of AMD chips in the Zen 2 and Navi families, which of course we covered AMD and their new chips with their 7 nanometer architecture, although I think some of those might be on the 9. But still, 7 nanometer means that they are more efficient, more power efficient, and of course heat efficient. That means that you can, well, do more with them. Now, that was, and of course, there's so much more going on, and we will be sure to, to kind of cover it as it comes out. But we are about a solid year away from actually knowing some true specs, so speculating is a little premature. So for our next story, we're going to speculate even more. Check this one out. This is from Engadget, and it has to do with Microsoft maybe building a diskless next-gen Xbox after all. So compatible and not compatible in some ways, saying that just when it seems Microsoft plans for the Project Scarlett were getting simpler, they have a new wrinkle in the narrative, where Microsoft is, according to Kotaku, Microsoft is working on a more affordable diskless version of the device named Lockhart. So now we have Scarlett and now Lockhart. So a completely different one, and still it's going to be part of the next generation. And actually, there's some ideas, and I'm hoping that they cover it here within the article, but this might indicate a cheaper, and actually they do. It's not going to be as good as some of the other ones. It's going to be a bit cheaper. The specs aren't going to be as good. Should be easier to manufacture without a disk drive. And overall, I think this is going to be like a much cheaper entry point, but Project Scarlett is still going to be kind of like the flagship of the line. So unpacking what that means is, it's of course, they mentioned back when rumors of Project Scarlett first trickled out, they suggested that they will release 2 devices, Anaconda, a traditional console with high-end specs, and Lockhart, a cheaper cloud-based device with minimal local computing capabilities. The pitch of Lockhart, at least, was that it was just enough processing power to handle a specific task like controller input, image processing, and importantly, collision detection. In this way, the console would allow you to stream a game without any of the usual drawbacks associated with tech like input delay. In later reports, the focus of Lockhart seemed to shift from cloud streaming device to a more traditional console. I guess they decided, much like with Stadia, the technology is just not quite there yet. So the important development is that when Microsoft finally shared the official details on Project Scarlett at E3, Phil Spencer did not mention a cheaper console at all. And he said, last year we said consoles, and we've shipped a console, and we've now detailed another console. I think that's plural. So returning to today's report, it now seems Microsoft is once again at least considering a second version of Project Scarlett, and though that doesn't mean that the 2 devices will come out at the same time next holiday season, I think they're right on that one. They're not going to cut into their own sales when people go out and buy consoles for their kids or themselves. Money is a huge determining factor, and if you have a full-blown console that has all the bells and whistles for, let's just say, $400, and then you have another, kind of slimmed down but still capable, quote unquote, console for $250 or $200, then yeah, you are going to be cannibalizing your own industry. So they mentioned that the device details in his report also sounds a lot more like the traditional console that was a feature of later reports related to Lockhart, and he mentioned that they think the console is the successor to the Xbox One S. And that one developer told Schreier that Lockhart features similar specs to the PlayStation 4 Pro, though it reportedly includes a solid-state drive and a faster processor than any current generation console, which, hey, that's just the advancement of time. These new parts are, of course, going to get cheaper, and there you go. They also aim that they can have games at 1440p and 60 frames per second, and of course, real-world performance may vary. So there you go. I would understand if this was like, if they're already developing kind of the smaller, leaner, cheaper version of the next generation console, because they know that seems to be their goal, is to have a full featured one. That's going to be their first one out, and then after that they bring out the the slimmed down one, a little bit cheaper, a little bit sleeker, good to go. And then after that, they, just like the Xbox One X now, they should release another one after that that's going to be even beefier and be the bridge between the next generation of consoles. Microsoft seems to have this down to a science, and it looks like they're really following the kind of the scheme. So there you go. There's the Xbox news. I'm looking forward to it. I honestly am, and I hope that Xbox does well. So there, even though PlayStation's probably just going to trounce them, but still, one can hope for the best. Now, I think our next story that we're going to do, and we have a lot of different ones, and this is video game, Rocket League. You know that one, the one with the cars, with rockets and the league. Yeah, there you go. Rocket League update removes loot boxes from the game. This is great. This is great news. Let's see. I think I have, let's see. So, here we go. Let's try this again. Rocket League update removes loot boxes from the game. All right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's a really, really good thing. It's a good thing that they're able to do that, and of course, not as many games are as successful. All right, shut up. Not as many games are as successful as Rocket League in their longevity. But I will say that loot boxes and loot crates in general were. I hope they're a fad, because they're a very toxic fad for video game players who just want to play the game, get all the features, get all the content, and not behind thousands of dollars in paywalls. So finally, the trend for randomized loot boxes in games is dying as publishers move away from the unpopular mechanic. And this is, again, according to the article, saying that as announced in today's update notes, Rocket League has changed its approach to cosmetic items to be less chance-based. Loot box-like crates have been replaced by blueprints, which drop after select online matches and show potential items that a player could create using it with their credits. There is still an element of randomization, of course, with the dropping of the blueprints, but players can decide if they want a given item before spending their money on it. Blueprints can also be traded with other players. So there you go. Another form of currency that is earned through in-game, which everyone likes. That is a really good thing. So this year has seen some legal backlash against loot boxes, of course, with the UK officials calling for them to be regulated like gambling, and publishers forced to disclose the odds of obtaining gear through these transactions. Rocket League developer Psyonix announced back in August that they would be ditching loot boxes as public opinion about the mechanic sours. Any crates or keys that players are still holding, they will be converted into blueprints. So new items players can head to the item shop, which is available in the main menu. So, and of course they can see the items. But hey, this is just one. And don't get me wrong, it's one game in an entire landscape, and some games do it better. And of course, my immediate gut reaction is to pick on Battlefield 2 from, of course, EA. Though, as I understand it, once the initial hype died down, once they weren't making as much money, I think that they really lowered the cost of cosmetics. They really upped the drop chance on these things. They've really scaled back the oppressive manner of obtaining cosmetics within the game. And of course, other heroes and things like that. So I can't even pick on, Battlefield 2 Battlefront 2. And they've changed it. Rocket League is changing. I've never really had a problem with games like Overwatch or Call of Duty, because I think that in a lot of ways they kind of shower you with loot, and admittedly, you don't get everything you want right away, but you do get a lot of stuff. So, but overall, it is a form of gambling. The amount of views on YouTube that these videos would get that are just simply people opening loot boxes over and over. Like, you spend $200 on loot boxes, and then thousands or millions of views later, kids will watch and see what you get. And I can't help but think that is gambling. That is like pulling a slot machine 200 times and looking at all of your pretty shiny things. It's very addictive to a younger generation. So I'm glad to see it starting to go away. So there you go. Good job, Rocket League. Great. And I believe that's Psyonix that makes them. Yeah, Psyonix. So good on them. Okay. There's that one. Let's see. Any other video games or things like that? Because I am on a roll. I think everything else is, not focused on video games. So there you go. There's the first part of it. Now, let's move on to something that I've looked at and I've said 100 times. Snapchat, do what makes you happy. That's what they say. Do what makes you happy and you'll never work a day in your life. But what happens if what makes you happy doesn't really work? And I just don't get 3D spectacles. And Snapchat, if you're listening, we'd love to have you on the program to explain this to me, because they create these hipster circular glasses that are for influencers. They're going to wear them. They have cameras built into the lenses, almost like the old-fashioned, or not even old-fashioned, but much like the old Google glasses, but they're trendy, they're hip, and at the same time, they're for recording short-form content on Snapchat. So, Snap teams up with, who do you think they would team up with when it comes to the world of tech? And really wearable glasses that will have new artificial intelligence features, and you're wondering, man, is that still within Google's purview? Is that going to be some new augmented reality firm that is up and coming and Snapchat is investing in them? Well, not really. Snap teams up with Gucci. Yes, Gucci, the ever fashionable, on limited edition 3D spectacles, saying that Harmony Korine's film Duck Duck film flaunts the new AR features. So there you go. And they even have a video here that you can see that you can watch in augmented reality, or virtual reality, I should say, using these glasses. So, and actually, let's see if we can play that in the background while we go ahead and do our thing. So you can see it there in on the website. Now, Snap is going all out to promote its latest Spectacles 3 AR glasses in Gucci fashion, collaboration, and strange arty film in Spring Breakers. They said that the limited edition Spectacles Gucci design was also done by Korine. Hand-painted in highly saturated tones, the color palette can be seen in Harmony's paintings and photography work. So, with that being said, the design also takes cue from Korine's new film, which was shot on Spectacles 3 and enhanced with 3D effects made specifically for the film. Set in Miami, it features a couple of pandas, a guy with headphones and a hot dog costume, and plenty of pastel-colored Snap effects. Snap described it as an unbridled dreamscape of sound and color, but most Miami residents would call it a Tuesday. I don't know. I would still call this more than just a Tuesday. I would call it weird. The film premiered yesterday evening at the Art Basel in Miami Beach. Now, while the content may not be for everyone, the idea of shooting a short film on the Spectacles 3 is pretty novel. By combining the first-person point of view, 3D effects, sunglasses inhabit their own hyper-personal universe and helped inspire the multi-sensory experience of Duck Duck. And there you go. So with that being said, Snap's collab with Korine isn't the first. He also worked on the company's Miami Beach Gucci-themed Christmas campaign. It's not clear whether Snap is going to sell Gucci spectacles, but you can try them on virtually using the Snapchat app. Snap used Lens Studios to create the 3D effects and make them available to all Spectacles 3 users. Now, with that being said, boy, Snap is an interesting platform. It allows you to create this really short form content. Like you can record little 10-second videos, and I think now they let you record longer videos that are stringed together, that are kind of strung together. It's meant to be very fading. It's meant to be very temporary. You take a picture, you send it to someone, the picture gets deleted. That is the heart and soul of Snapchat. It's a snapshot into someone's life. So the idea the idea that you are going to create something that is permanent, like a film. And of course, the film can be indicative of the time, but it's very counter to the idea of what Snapchat is, which is temporary, fleeting moments. We're just gonna go ahead and turn that off. That is so flippin' weird. So, I don't know what the end game is for Snapchat. I don't know how they determine if this is a successful product or if this is a successful line of, trying to take the company. But hey, it got us talking about it, so maybe that's all they really wanted. I have no idea, but it's darn weird. It's darn weird. Now, so there's Snap. Let's go ahead and talk about Opera. So Opera, they've been on the show before, and we love talking to them. The reason that we like talking to Opera, and it's not the musical act or not the musical genre, but rather the makers of the browser. Opera was the first in so many ways. They were one of the first ones to have a pop-up blocker. They were one of the first ones to have tabs. They were one of the first ones to do, just incognito mode. So many features that come standard in browsers nowadays were pioneered by Opera. And I really do hope that people, first of all, try Opera. I'm not saying that Opera's not worth using. I'm saying that Opera, a lot of other companies take cues from Opera, and I hope that this feature is the same way. So this one has to do with night mode. If you aren't familiar, well, there's night mode and dark mode. So dark mode is what I should have said, and this one allows any web page to have a dark mode version, even if it was not designed to have one. Saying that, and this is, by the way, from Engadget, Ms. Rachel England, saying that tech companies and device manufacturers have long touted ways to reduce a screen's dreaded blue glare, the light that disturbs the natural circadian rhythm in a body and affects sleep. Well, Opera is rolling out a revamped night mode function that promises even dimmer nighttime scrolling. I don't know about a lot of folks out there. I use dark mode, night mode, whatever. I use dark mode almost everywhere possible. First of all, it cuts down on battery loss. So of course, if browsing the web, you're going to save a lot of battery time. It's easier on my eyes, less strain. I feel, a little bit less like I have a headache after a long session on websites and things like that. And, just kind of less jarring. And it definitely does help with, getting me to fall asleep when I'm browsing my phone before I go to bed. So version 55 of Opera's web browser for Android will come with a night mode that not only dims the browser, but will turn white web pages dark even if they're not designed that way. They say that they inject its own changes to a site's CSS to turn the white background black instead of just reducing white brightness. And by the way, similar to the tools Chrome has been working on. So Chrome is also working on this, but hey, Opera was able to get it out on their live version. Additionally, users will be able to select a more traditional red light overlay, decide on dark mode scheduling, set automatic timers, and dim the screen keyboard as well. They also mentioned that with this release, by turning our browser super dark, we've made sure you won't disturb those around you when they're trying to sleep. You will also feel more relaxed once it's time to put the phone down for the night. So, as I said before, I am a huge fan of dark mode, night mode, whatever you want to call it. And being able to very much, kind of on the fly or, very much on the fly immediately without any kind of settings or changes or user input, being able to change all those things is very impressive, and I hope to see definitely more of that. So good job, Opera. Now, let's, so from Opera, kudos, let's go ahead and talk about, a lot of these are bad, and well, you know what? No, Portland deserves their kudos. They have so little to be thankful for. I'm kidding. Portland's a great place. Good luck with that. But this one came out a little while ago, saying that Portland plans to propose the strictest facial recognition ban in the country. So this is very, very different than places like New York City. Very much, like California and San Francisco, but very anti, New York City and what we've seen from so many other places. So this is coming to us from Fast Company by Mr. Sean Captain, saying that as the federal government plods along on developing privacy laws, some cities are taking matters into their own hands, saying that with facial recognition technology at the top of the list, Portland, Oregon has plans to ban the use of facial recognition for both government and private business in the city, a move that could make Portland's ban the most restrictive in the United States. So, real quick here, they mentioned facial recognition. They are not banning security cameras. Security cameras, I think, are at this point are kind of ubiquitous for private industry and for the government. And trying to get that banned is just going to be near impossible. But at least the ability to run software on the video and track and identify people on the fly, that seems to be, very much on the chopping block. So so the proposed ban comes after cities including San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, and Somerville in Massachusetts have already banned the use of facial recognition by the city government agencies, including the police departments. But Portland's ban goes a step further by including that into private businesses. That's going to be key. I'm hoping that all these places that have already banned it for law enforcement go ahead and ban it for private companies, because we have seen private industry pick up the slack where government agencies don't really feel like doing it, don't feel like investing. They will outsource the job and private industry will do it for them. So banning it for law enforcement, some ways you can say, well, if it's for law enforcement, then it's banned anyways. But we've seen Amazon. Yeah, of course, that company. We've seen Amazon trying to sell its facial recognition systems to law enforcement around the country. And that is a private company who is doing facial recognition software. If they did it for these, police agencies, is that within the ban? Is it not within the ban? I don't know, but at least in Portland, it would be against the ban. I know that for sure because, as I said, it is for government and private business. So they said that, and of course, it would go a step further if it makes it into law in spring 2020, so just a couple of months away. It could be a preview of what to expect across the country. I think we're going to start seeing more and more of private sector bans. People are really concerned about facial recognition use and the tracking of their innate features by governments and private corporations. Absolutely. And along with being used in policing, facial recognition is becoming a fixture in retail stores, stadiums, and even schools. Software providers like Microsoft, Amazon, IBM, they all offer algorithms that any developer can use to analyze a face, and other big companies like Facebook have already implemented facial recognition on social media. And of course, for Facebook, that would be, you upload a picture and it would say, oh, we think Ben is in this photo. Would you like to tag Ben? Yeah, Facebook's already very good at identifying a lot of people's faces. They mentioned that the technology has high rates of false positive for women and people of color, which means that they are more likely to be misidentified and targeted for things that they didn't do, or for being in places that they weren't actually in. They also mentioned that private and government use of facial recognition, such as the ways hundreds of police departments are using video captured by Amazon's Ring smart doorbells, saying that, quote, I am very worried about the companies collecting data and storing it and then making sweetheart deals with law enforcement to get access to that data. We covered this yesterday with Mike Cermak. At least at this point, Amazon is still asking the owners of the video, which would be the people who own the doorbell, if they would be okay with law enforcement accessing the video footage. So until that changes, I'm actually kind of okay with the Ring doorbell thing. They also mentioned that the article goes on for a bit here about the problem with consent using these things and the problem with having it in the private sector. The article goes on. We're going to include it in the show notes, but I think we're going to go ahead and wrap that one up there. But still, Portland, that is really probably and hopefully the way that most cities and states and heck even nationally, I hope that's the way that goes, because man, if you're talking about the ability to move about with some level of autonomy, then that is the polar opposite. And trust me, if you've ever flown on a plane in or out of the country, or if you have a driver's license in any number of states, you are already in the system. So it's only going to get worse until we specifically target it with legislation and restrictions on what they can and cannot do. Because right now, the technology is just unfortunately moving so much faster than the lawmakers are, that it's not even like, well, it's legal, so the companies, it's like, it's not really legal, it's just not illegal. It's something that has not been challenged or ruled in courts. It's not something that even up until this point, or even up until like a year or two ago, this has really been a possibility or a topic of conversation. So it exists, much like the self-driving cars of yesteryear. It exists because there's nothing saying that it can't exist. That's where we are. So now, with that being said, let's go ahead and continue on here. And this story is why I have such an issue with 5G. And this has to do with the overstating of benefits and the over-exaggeration of coverage of 5G. Because right now, I think there are so many, Verizon and T-Mobile and all these other carriers, they're already promising that 5G is going to be available by the end of 2020 to like 93% of the American population. Don't get me wrong, a large majority of the American population a lot of people live in big cities, so think like New York, LA, blah, blah, blah. So you only have to cover a couple cities with 5G coverage to get that kind of number. People in rural areas, which we're actually going to talk about that as well, are going to be a little bit worse off. But at the same time, I just don't think it's really feasible that they're able to do this. So this one coming to us from Ars Technica, Mr. John Brodkin, saying that FCC tries to bury finding that Verizon and T-Mobile exaggerated 4G coverage. Who knew? So Verizon, T-Mobile, and U.S. Cellular exaggerated their 4G coverage in official filings to the Federal Communications Commission. But the FCC officials confirmed that Chairman Ajit Pai does not plan to punish these three carriers in any way. Instead, the FCC intends to issue an enforcement advisory to the broader industry, reminding carriers of the penalties associated with filings that violate federal law. So essentially, they're saying, we're not going to, you lied to us, so here's an email saying, don't lie to us. And instead of any kind of punishment, it's not even a slap on the wrist. Saying that, quote, overstating mobile broadband coverage misleads the public and can misallocate our limited universal service funds, and thus it must be met with meaningful consequences. But there won't be any meaningful consequences for Verizon, T-Mobile, or U.S. Cellular. Based upon the totality of the circumstances, the investigation did not find a sufficiently clear violation of the Mobility Fund Phase 2 data collection requirement that warranted enforcement action. That's what a spokesperson told Ars Technica. It's one of those things that I really do feel like, again, going back to the quote here, based upon the totality of the circumstances, the investigation did not find a clear violation. They clearly violated. They lied. It's just a matter of, did they lie enough to warrant a punishment? And the answer should be yes, because the Mobility Fund, based on the amount of coverage that they put out, based on the amount of investment that they put in the infrastructure to get Americans a better cell phone signal, to get them better data, to get them essentially better technology into people's hands, they get more or less federal funding. There was a time when America spent like $1 trillion to get every American in this country a fiber connection. Where did that go? Well, it went into development, and all of the money mysteriously vanished with almost none of the proposed benefits. These companies love federal dollars, but they do not want to actually meet the federal demands that they can actually do. So here we go. FCC officials conducted drive tests to determine whether providers' coverage matched reality, and they had a staff report say that only 62% of staff driving tests achieve at least a minimum download speed of predicted by the coverage maps, with US Cellular achieving a speed of only 45% at such tests, T-Mobile 63%, and Verizon you are looking at 64% of tests, saying that staff stationary tests show that each provider achieves sufficient download speeds, meeting the minimum cell edge probability, in fewer than half of all test locations. Essentially 20 out of 42. In addition, staff was unable to obtain any 4G LTE signal for 38% of the drive test on US Cellular's network, 21% on T-Mobile, and 16% of drive tests in Verizon's network, despite each provider reporting coverage in that area. So what does that mean? That means that, let's see, so 38%, 21%, about 1/3 to 1/5 of the time, people were unable to obtain any 4G LTE coverage in a place that these carriers said they were going to get 4G LTE coverage. Even more so, they only about 60% were able to achieve a minimum download speed predicted by the coverage map, and a minimum download speed would be something like, 20 megabits per second, 10 megabits per second, so on and so forth. 4 out of 10 times with almost every one of these companies, although US Cellular seems to be the worst offender in all of these. 4 out of 10 times, you are looking at not getting any kind of coverage that you should be expecting. That's a lot of lying. Like, it's not even like 95 and, they're fudging the numbers a little bit. They're fudging the numbers a lot a bit. I mean, 65 as opposed to 100% as reported is just awful. So they mentioned back in 2017, they required carriers to file maps and data indicating the coverage in order to help Commission determine which rural areas should get $4.5 billion in the Mobility Fund money over 10 years. But small rural carriers pointed out that big carriers exaggerated their coverage, potentially preventing those small carriers from getting the funding to improve connectivity in areas that lack good service. And like I said before, this is the big problem with the coverage maps. If they don't match, then people are getting the short end of the stick, and these carriers are getting federal funds to provide coverage to these areas, even though they're not. It's certainly like this money should be a reward for getting service to more people. And instead, they're lying and getting the money anyways. And then, of course, the FCC, in its current form, is instead of punishing them or enforcing their own rules and regulations, they're rolling over and saying, well, don't do that, and it's whatever. So they also announced the issuance of the investigation report in the third paragraph of a press release titled Chairman Pai announced plan to launch $9 billion 5G fund for rural America. Pai's press release referred generally to carriers overstating coverage, but it did not name any of the specific carriers that do so. And again, this report focused on US Cellular, Verizon, and T-Mobile. Well, I can almost guarantee that the others are doing it as well. Let's just hope they aren't as bad as these three. Pai's office held a press call with reporters in which FCC officials focused almost entirely on the new 5G fund than the carrier's inaccurate filings. And as a result, early news coverage of the announcement focused more on the 5G fund than the carrier's misdeeds. And we had another article here, right here from Engadget, exactly what that was. So with that being said, and of course you can see here, almost the entirety, there's like one line in the coverage from Engadget, and again, it's not Engadget's fault. The FCC completely buried this story within another positive story. They said that the FCC acknowledged that an investigation report which found that carriers were inflating their 4G LTE coverage maps. And as you may remember, Microsoft came to this conclusion last year. They say it will take steps to make sure that going forward, coverage data is accurate. Why aren't they doing anything now? Who knows? But there you go. Yeah, their goal is to have healthy broadband coverage, but it's not actually to take anyone to task for doing that. So this article goes on for a bit here. Obviously, the FCC should come up with a better system to replace the challenge process, and that includes self-reporting. It should be, completely gone. There should be third-party independent researchers who are going out there and actually finding the true coverage maps, and not those submitted by the companies who are, over-exaggerating. They said that it's been a problem for mobile and home broadband as Form 477 rules have long allowed each ISP to count an entire census block as served, even if it can serve just one home in that block, which has always been another problem. If their coverage extends to even just like a tiny corner of how they kind of district up the service areas, then they count that area as served, even though in a real world test, it means nothing. It means nothing. But hey, that's the best information that the FCC would have to go on. That's the best information that funding, allocation, that anyone has to go on. It hurts consumers, and it only helps the ISPs and, of course, the cell carriers. It's just awful. So the FCC voted in August to finally collect more accurate data with a new requirement that home internet providers give the FCC geospatial maps of where they provide service instead of merely reporting census blocks that they serve in. So this happened in August. But hey, if they don't, and this current FCC just decides we're not going to enforce really anything, what's the point of having that? And actually, with that line of thinking, let's go ahead and switch over to, let's see, I think I had it, or did I just completely skip that one? I think it was this one. Here we go. So with that line of thinking, even if you roll out, here's what you should do, better legislation, better reporting, harsher fines and penalties and fees, blah, blah, blah. What does it mean if you don't actually enforce anything? Well, I think that is how we should transition to our next topic. Since the FCC won't act, this is coming to us from the Register. They mentioned Congress finally moves on robocalls by passing half-decent Traced Act. And by half-decent, I think that the Register is actually giving them a little too much credit. So they mentioned that U.S. Congress has finally acted on the scourge of robocalls, where they said that about 417 votes to 3 with 11 not voting. So almost unanimous support in the House. They passed the Traced Act. They voted, so senators earlier passed the linked Senate Bill 151, meaning both halves of Congress have approved the anti-robocall law. The legislation will now head to the president's desk for signing, saying that the new law is likely to prove effective. It gives the FCC the power to find robocallers up to 20,000 times every time they make unwanted calls or text messages from a caller using an unauthenticated number. This could swiftly add up to massive fines, giving huge numbers of calls and messages that are usually spammed out. Okay, so let's just stop right there and talk about this. The FCC has already fined hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars to robocallers, because a single robocalling operation can call millions of people. It can waste millions of people's time, potentially scam people out of millions of dollars. The numbers are already in huge numbers. The amount of money that that the FCC has actually collected in fines, penalties, and fees is only about $4,000. Not $4 billion, not $400 million, $4,000. It doesn't matter if you charge them the entire gross domestic product of human civilization up until this point. You can charge them $18 trillion a year, and you can't look at them and go, look how good we're doing. Look how strong on robocalls we are. If you can't actually do anything, then it doesn't matter. And so with that being said, going on with the article, just as importantly, the law recognizes that the companies, often scammers, that currently make about 48 billion spoof calls every year are going to try to find a way around the new law, and adds the requirement that regulators periodically report back to Congress identifying how effectively the problem is being tackled, and identifying any new laws or authorizations that may be required to keep a lid on it. Saying that it's been 7 years since the problem of robocalls became so significant that the Federal Trade Commission offered $50,000 cash prize, and of course that prize was split between two companies. But despite the endless threat from the FTC and the FCC about coming down hard on robocalls, the problem has only grown, and by the way, it will only continue to grow. There you go. So let's see. So scrolling through the article here, let's just go ahead that the Traced Act will put an end to that nonsense. The FCC will be able to levy huge fines, although whether it actually bothers to collect them is a different matter. It probably won't. And mobile companies will be allowed to block robocallers. They claim that there was some legal impediment in doing so. A highly questionable point. There really wasn't anyways. And they are obliged to not charge for what should have been a basic service years ago, which is, of course, call blocking. The statute of limitations on this issue has also been extended to 4 years, making it much harder for scammers to run out the clock on legal actions taken against them. So the speeches on the floor of the House of Representatives today were full of fire and fury, stating that they were going to crack down harder on illegal scammers and really nail them. All those, by the way, were quotes, because I normally don't talk like that. Now, hopefully it will hold up, and the FCC will see that it will have little choice but to come good on its years of empty promises. This does almost nothing. Like, the answer to robocalling is not fines, penalties, and fees. It's, first of all, enforcing private companies that will solicit upselling and things like that. We just did a report, I think it was on Tuesday, about the nature of most of these robocalls. And then the other part is a better technology that will verify a number and make sure that number is where that number is coming from. No more call spoofing, essentially, is what needs to happen, so that you can immediately tell that I don't know anyone in the service area of, XYZ, so I don't have any need to pick that up. People have become so used to not picking up their phones that, hey, it really does feel like individuals have a better solution to robocallers than legislators and the carriers. So, which again is just not picking up and waiting for it to go to voicemail. Now, with that being said, let's go ahead and continue on here. Let's see, we have time for like one, maybe two more stories. How about this one? This one is hard tech, which is great. Qualcomm's new Snapdragon 865 is 25% faster and comes with mandatory 5G antenna. 5G modem. The 5G modem still isn't integrated, but Qualcomm won't sell the 865 without one. So 5G is, they want to make sure that anyone using the latest Snapdragon Qualcomm system on a chip is going to be 5G compatible. You can't decouple the two. So they said that Qualcomm detailed its flagship system on a chip for 2020, the Snapdragon 865. This is going to be the chip that ships with almost every single high-end Android phone. So think like your Samsungs, think about your LGs, think about any Google phones. This is what's going to be inside of it. And they said that the GPU and CPU are 25% faster compared to the previous iteration. They also mentioned, like last year, this is an 8-core, 7-nanometer chip, but is being manufactured on TSMC's improved 7-nanometer N7P node, the same manufacturing process used by Apple's A13 system on a chip. They said that this year's bigger CPU cores have been upgraded from Qualcomm's Cryo 485 cores on the A55, and instead now they are the Cryo 585 CPU, which uses ARM Cortex A77. Essentially, what does that mean? That means that you're going from a single prime A77 core, which is at 2.84 gigahertz, and 3 other cores that are at 2.42 gigahertz. Pretty good. And of course, the smaller cores are going to be down to 1.8 gigahertz for kind of background processes and whatnot. A little more efficient, but the big story here is a lot more speed. Phones should be more responsive, they should be snappier, and hey, it should be really, really good. So they also mentioned some other hardware here, saying that the camera coprocessor has a max processing bandwidth of 2 gigapixels. Pretty darn good, allowing cameras to shoot up to 200 megapixel and videos to capture 8K at 30 FPS or 4K at 120 FPS, and that high speed is still capped at 960 frames per second at 720p. But you'll be able to record those speeds indefinitely instead of only at short burst. Obviously, 200 megapixels probably won't be happening. There really won't be much need for 8K 30 FPS or 4K at 120 FPS, but you're going to have the ability. And that's the point. You don't want your processor to be the bottleneck. You want, that's one more thing out of the equation. Let's see. So any other highlights here that we could talk about? Let's see. The new chip will be the first to support Google's new digital driver's license scheme, aka the Android Identity Credentials API, coming to Android R. And the idea is that instead of lugging around a dumb plastic card, you could carry state and federally recognized IDs on your smartphone as just another app. Essentially saying that this technology will be secure enough, fast enough, have enough data packed into it that it will count as, let's say, a driver's license. It will count as a driver's license or a passport. It will be almost impossible to fake, and that would be the big point of it. So while Google and Qualcomm seem hard at work on the technical aspects of the digital driver's license, this is also a legal issue. It would need friendly neighborhood governments to be on board with a change like this. So there's actually they bring up one more point here. One of them is that before you run into the comments and type "what if my battery dies," there's a mode that will allow your digital ID to be shown when the battery is too low to boot into the full Android OS. There is even work being done to allow for transferring the information to a police officer without having to unlock your entire phone, so the cops can't be digging around your phone for all of your data. Really, it sounds very interesting. And from a tech point of view, if they can get it to work, it's great. Looking forward to it. But like they said, it's also a legal issue. So who knows if that could actually happen. So one story that I wasn't able to get to today, and we have like 2 minutes left, but this happened late Tuesday, I think. But looks like let's see. So it looks like Google had a bit of a shakeup, and by Google, I mean Alphabet, where the co-founders actually, they left. They said that Google is reorganizing, and Sundar Pichai will become the new CEO, who I think was in charge of Google, but will now be moving to Alphabet, if I'm not mistaken. So they said that the first thing, Sundar Pichai, he is a 47-year-old CEO of Google, and as of yesterday, the CEO of the parent company, Alphabet. Yeah, so he was CEO of Google, now he's CEO of the entire Alphabet umbrella. He comes from humble beginnings. They mentioned Pichai joined the company back in 2004 and ran Chrome and Android before being named CEO in 2015. He attended the 2013 Google holiday party while still a Chrome executive and was very nice to the author personally, which is consistent with virtually all other reports, which, hey, you want a nice guy there. They said that Wall Street likes him, shares of Google rose about 2%, and when he was named the CEO of Alphabet, adding $2.3 billion to the network of Page and Brin, of course, stepping down. And now Alphabet, of course, They said that the original idea was that it was to give operational independence on several budget and nascent projects inside the company, such as driverless cars, healthcare initiative, blah, blah, blah. Essentially, they're asking, what's the point of Alphabet? And I think at this point, Google has become something more than just your average tech company. Google has become this giant octopus of, just tech overlords. And I don't know, for the founders and co-founders of the company to leave and, go off to do their own side projects, Pichai, it's now his job to redirect this giant amalgamation of tech into something that hopefully is a little bit less anti-competitive, a little bit less antitrust, and, hopefully a much better company. So I'm wondering what's going to happen with Alphabet, but I think Pichai is probably the right guy for the job. So there you go. Ladies and gentlemen, that's about all the time we have for today. Music playing softly in the background. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to Computer America, Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern. Until next time, have a great one. Bye, everyone.